Greetings, brethren, once again, and welcome to our continuing discussion on the topic of the storehouse headquarters. And in this presentation, we will focus on the Davidian leadership crisis since 1955. We'll ask questions like, why are there so many factions amongst Davidians this day? What is the cause for this? And who's leading who? And what are remedies? What can we do to advance the shepherd's rod message and make it to the kingdom? So with this in mind, we'll address some probing questions regarding leadership. For example, why do some Davidian associations today have no president, but a vice president instead? Strange paradox. Or, doesn't the bylaws allow for the executive council to replace officers, save that of the president? Well, that's true, but we have to apply it to its proper period and not take it out of context. So we'll look at this. Or this question, where in the original shepherd's rod message does it say that Davidians are to follow a General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, or GADSDA, after 1955? If there's a reference, let's see it. Or this question, do you need an executive council to advance the shepherd's rod message? Well, in our last video, we showed conclusively the answer is no, but we'll review that again. And what makes UPA7.org different from other Davidian organizations? There are some very distinct differences, so we want to make sure you understand those. And what are the qualifications to be a leader in this movement? We should know. So we'll lay that out for you and give you some encouragement of what to do, what you can do as an individual to take this message throughout Laodicea like the leaves of autumn. So the only true and proper leader of the shepherd's rod message was this man, Victor Houteff, from 1930 to 1955. And he warned clearly in his writings that there would arise impostors and usurpers. For instance, we'll read this passage in Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 5, page 14. It reads, man has long been exalting himself, so much so, in fact, that there are perhaps only a few Christians in the world that are really following the light of the Lord. Most of them are following sparks of men, following uninspired interpretations of the Scriptures, devisings of men who scoff at the idea of inspiration. They see no need of more truth or prophets, although they well know that the only truth that has ever come has been through chosen servants of God. Even present truth believers have not as yet fully awakened to this startling revelation. Many of them are carried away with every wind of doctrine, much of which is created by impostors such as Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, coveting Moses' office, usurpers of inspiration's throne, taking sides, one for Paul and another for Apollos, as it were. So, brethren, have you really sat down and applied this to our current situation? That today we have impostors? That even as present truth believers, we're very easily misled by winds of doctrine that blow throughout the Davidian groups? And that these usurpers are actively in our midst? Well, we should be wide awake and know who they are and by what their fruit is, what they're doing. So let us be wide awake and investigate so we know what is being taught. So we're told that unsuspected foes and friends of the message would cause a knockout blow. And it's this reading from White House Recruiter, page 33, published in 1951. It reads, everything that can be done against God's message of today will be done with even greater vengeance than was manifest against heaven's message in the days of Christ's first advent. For the devil knows that if he loses now, he loses forever, that he is to have no other chance. Unparalleled, therefore, is the urgency that every 11th hour church member now quickly and solidly brace himself against the enemy's effort to deliver a knockout blow. We must be alert, too, for to realize that the blow is to come from surprisingly unsuspected foes, from professed friends of the gospel, who are no less pious than were the priests of Christ's day. Do we come to really comprehend the depth of this warning, that these professed friends of the faith are going to be the foes that are going to try to destroy and deliver a knockout blow to the very message we hold dear? Well, we often take a short-sighted view and think, oh, well, this is the work of Florence Houteff. Well, that's true, but the depth of her legacy is poorly understood in how it manifests in our presence today, even though she's long dead. So yes, Florence Houteff was one of the first friends of the faith, unsuspected foe, to rise up and attempt to knock out the shepherd's rod message. And here's proof. Brother Houteff died on February 5th, 1955, on the evening of a Sabbath. The next day, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Florence Houteff convened a meeting of the Executive Council with the following agenda. She claims that the purpose was to pass a resolution on the following requests made by V.T. Houteff before his death. Now, she's claiming that Brother Houteff made these requests. We know that's totally bogus. It's false. So she's right off the bat lying. But one of the items was that in the case of Brother V.T. Houteff's death, which would automatically leave vacant the office of president, Mrs. Florence Houteff be appointed to fill the office of vice president. Right here, she usurps the leadership of the association, destroys the office of president, and puts herself in as vice president. Lord have mercy. A woman should never lead God's work. That's the job appointed, or the role appointed to a male priest, not to a woman. So, of course, once she fooled the people and got in control, she literally destroyed this message, attempted to. So, we want to make certain of her defiled legacy. It's much deeper than most people realize. Most people only point out her false prophecy of the 42 month that ended in April of 22nd of 1959. But it's much deeper than that. She not only usurped the leadership of Mount Carmel, she destroyed the office of president and installed herself as vice president. Okay, we saw the meeting minutes proving that. She then began to tamper with the original Shepherd's Rod literature by editing Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Numbers 23 and 24. It was a very subtle change, but she claimed the copyright in her own name rather than Brother Houteff, who was the author and the copywriter of the original Timely Greetings. So this subtle trend began a dangerous precedent. She then took it upon herself to publish unauthorized sermon addresses in the New Codes, starting with Volume 10, Number 7, up to Volume 13, Numbers 11 and 12. And the content of these alleged sermons has a number of things that contradict what's published in the original Shepherd's Rod. And we've posted on this and made clear why the New Codes cannot be considered part of the inspired Shepherd's Rod message found in the Golden Bowl. There's just too many problems with it. And there's no authorization by the prophet himself to publish these. So that's another part of her legacy. She plagiarized and rewrote the entire Shepherd's Rod message and labeled it the 11th hour radio messages to take to the Protestant churches and no longer to plead with Mother. Wholesale rank apostasy. She took the hunting campaign, which was started by Brother Houteff, in a total new direction, began to obnoxiously confront 70 Adventists at camp meetings and at their general conference sessions with cars with placards and bullhorns. So she perverted the original hunting campaign, which was to go house to house to hunt out Seventh-day Adventists in their homes, in their meeting places, but not to make it confrontational. And then she made gross false prophecies in behalf of the message, in particular the 42 months. So this entire legacy, unfortunately, has been carried on by many of the Davidian groups, as we pointed out in previous videos. So here's some links for further study that we've already published on the history of the storehouse. It can be found on our YouTube channel, Universal Publishing Association. For example, Old Mount Carmel Center from 1930 to 1955. The Scattering Time from 1955 to 2010. And then Is Waco the Place Today? Addressing the claim of many Davidians to relocate back to the original a portion of the original property in Waco, Texas. So all of this is addressed in these videos. So please, if you haven't had a chance, look at these carefully, because there's some very valuable history and documentation presented. So regarding leadership, is it president or vice president? Prophet or not? Well, if we just take the Leviticus as it reads on page 5 in Article 4, Section 1, Part A of the bylaws, it says the regular officers of this association shall be a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. That's very plain. So who gave man the authority to remove the office of president? Florence Houteff. And what's really strange is why do people continue to follow her apostasy and vote in vice presidents with no president? It makes no sense. Their argument or justification, which is utterly false, is that, well, Brother Houteff was the last Porter Prophet president, and since he's dead, we can no longer have a president. But the president does not have to be a prophet, because if you look at the Leviticus in Article 4, Section 2, it reads, the president shall, as typed in Exodus chapter 4 and in Numbers chapter 16, verses 12 and 25 to 32, act as chairman of the Executive Council, as chief administrator of the affairs of the association, and as a worker and minister in the general interest of the association. That's the job description of the president. There's nothing in there that says the president has to be a prophet. As it turns out, Brother Houteff occupied two offices, that of Porter Prophet and that of president. Okay? So it's important to distinguish the two. So some people have objected, well, don't the bylaws allow for the Executive Council to replace officers, save that of the president? Well, this is based on the bylaws, Article 1, Section 1, Part C in the Leviticus, page 6, which reads, it, being the Executive Council, shall be vested with authority to grant credentials and licenses and to fill vacancies that may occur in any of the association's offices, save that of the president. Well, how do we respond to this? Well, this is only applicable to the Executive Council that existed from 1943 to 1955, while Brother Houteff was alive and writing and publishing the message. But after his death in 1955, up to the period of Ezekiel 9, the message is already complete and waiting for the loud cry. You can find this in Volume 1 of Timely Greetings, number 5, page 12. So since the message is complete, it's ready to equip the candidates for the 144,000 all the way to the kingdom. There's no more need of a prophet or a president today to write another message. It's already done. So any GADSDA that wants to establish a headquarters before Ezekiel 9 is not in accordance with the Leviticus. Why? It is because there's no such reference in the original Shepherd's Rod where Brother Houteff stated to establish a new GADSDA and make him the president while he's 6 feet under the ground, in the grave. Worse yet, there's no such reference to establish a GADSDA headquarters, mixing the original published Shepherd's Rod with the teachings of the apostate Florence Houteff that contradicts the message of God given to his true prophet, Brother Houteff. We need to recognize that, and some Davidians did, that after Brother Houteff died, we're in the scattering time. The shepherd will be smitten and the sheep should be scattered. Zechariah 13, verse 7. So this being the case, there's no need to call for organizing everybody under an association. We can work under independent storehouses. So the only legitimate executive council that existed in the history of the Shepherd's Rod from 1943 to 1955 was the following: executive officers, President V.T. Houteff, Vice President E.T. Wilson, Secretary Mrs. Florence Houteff, and Treasurer Mrs. S. Hermison. You can read this in Fundamental Beliefs, page 16, also reporting unavidous activities, page 20. And then there was an executive council that included a total of 7 members. Outside of this, all executive councils that have been voted in by popular vote of the people, with no president and only a vice president to do the job of a president who's dead in his grave, are illegitimate. They're not in harmony with the Leviticus. And we've showed that in more detail in the previous video, which you can find a link in the description box below. So here's a brief historical timeline of the Shepherd's Rod, which we covered in more detail in our prior video. During the period from 1930 to 1955, Brother Houteff rose up and organized the association to publish the Shepherd's Rod and the various branches of the work, and established a GADSDA that operated from 1943 to 1955. When he died, then the association was usurped or taken over by Florence, who then in a period of 7 years ran it into the ground. But fortunately, in 1962, God rose up 100% rod-only Davidians that brought the original Shepherd's Rod literature, the message, back to where it belonged. And that continued through a series of storehouses in Southern California under Brother Warden, then Salem, South Carolina, Yucaipa, California, Mountain Dale, New York, and then to up7.org, which has existed since 2006. Along the way, various impostors or factions have broken off: Roden's branch, Bingham's Bashan Hill, Don Adair and his Salem or Tomasi Association, the New Waco Group in 1991 under Norman Archer. All of these are breakaways that do not publish the original Shepherd's Rod and do not follow the Leviticus and teach all winds of doctrine. So we're going to see how this, by definition, exposes them as impostors. So with no shepherd, many factions appear. And here's a breakdown in terms of chronology. The first to rise was the Branch Davidians under Ben Roden. And once he died, then it went to the next prophet, his wife Lois, and then she dies, and then there's a whole bunch of factions that have arisen and gone away. But the current ones are Tom Codwell, Trent Wilde, Charles Pace, Teresa Moore, and who knows, maybe others. But this is the whole lineage of the branch counterfeit. 1962, Bashan Hill and Bingham broke away from the Vista Association under Brother Warden and kept their false teaching. A living spirit prophecy has to be a living porter to bind up the testimonies, which is completely false. But nonetheless, he dies. The adulterous second wife, Jimmy Bingham, takes over. She dies recently, and then the son, Trevor, is now the current porter, who's going around trying to unite all Davidia under Bashan, which is doomed to failure. 1974, Don Adair usurped the association in Salem and maintains a leader to this day for the Mount Carmel Center there in Salem. 1981, the Gilead pasture started by Mervyn Jordan. He was a breakaway off of Bashan. 1983, the International GADSDA, Red Bluff, California, started by Wanda Bloom O'Berry. Married 3 different men. Well, she was a breakaway from the Yucaipa Association. Continues to this day. 1986, GADSDA Mountaindale, Mount Carmel Center, under a small group of leaders, Errol Stanford, Glenroy Matthews being two of the principal ones. 1991, GADSDA Waco, Mount Carmel Center, one of the rival factions, led by Norman Archer and others. 1993, Heralds of the King, started by Roland Roberts and Garrick Augustus, who broke off of Mountaindale and Waco, and they got their own group in Missouri to this day, believing all kinds of strange things. 1996, the Mustard Seed Advent, started by Derek West, who broke another breakaway from Bashan. 2005, GADSDA Tennessee. This group is apparently still in existence, but they broke from the chaos that occurred in Mountaindale in 2005, where they split into two factions, or mini splinters. The current leaders, it's not well known who they are at this point. 2012, GADSDA Waco number 2, started by Lennox Sam, who's opposing Archer and his gang. We'll look at this one a little bit more later. So here are all these factions. Now, pure logic dictates that they all can't be right, because they all teach every wind of doctrine. So how do we sort out this maze, this complicated mess? Well, the only way is to look at history and look at the original shepherd's rod and recognize that Brother Houteff predicted that there would be an antitypical showdown at Mount Carmel. And here's the quote, Amos 1:2. The Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the habitations of the shepherd shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. And Brother Houteff comments here in Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 41, page 7. It reads, this scripture, you see, reflects the tragedy which took place on the top of Carmel in the days of Elijah. Here we are given a hint that there is to be another showdown between the prophet of God and the prophets of Baal. The prophets of Baal in our day even boast that they are not inspired, that what they teach and preach is what they themselves discovered by deep study and research. They even sneer at those who claim to be inspired of the Lord. They seem to think that God has forsaken the earth, that he cares not to send his Spirit, as in former time, that men are now so wise that what the Spirit can do for them, they themselves can do even better. The truth is, though, that if there ever was a need for inspired interpreters of the Scriptures, it is today, why many winds of doctrine are blowing from all directions, bringing in confusion, dissension, and disaster everywhere. No one sees eye to eye. Well, isn't this, what greater truth can you find than this, describing exactly what we see amongst these various competing factions amongst Davidians? So let's dig deeper into this and identify who are the principals in this antitypical showdown at Mount Carmel. Who represents the prophet of God, and who are these prophets of Baal? We need to know. Well, the rod tells us that the prophet of God is represented by the hands of Zerubbabel. Zechariah 4:10. Let's read this. It says, for who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice, and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel. With those 7, they are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro through the whole earth. And then Brother Houteff comments on this in Timely Greetings, Volume 1, number 14, page 21, and also 2SR, page 280, and other places. It reads, the day this scripture is fulfilled is the day in which the Lord of hosts starts a reformatory work in an apparently very small and insignificant way. And those who despise small and insignificant beginnings will at last rejoice and shall see that Antitypical Zerubbabel is the one to direct the work along with all 7 of his helpers. They are the eyes of the Lord. What a momentous day. What a great people. Evidently, they constitute the stone of Zechariah 3, which we studied several weeks ago, and learned that it has 7 eyes, complete spiritual vision. Obviously, this is the stone that smites the great image of Daniel 2:45. Well, we know that that stone of Daniel 2:45 is none other than the 144,000 that emerge after the church is purified in Ezekiel 9. So those are the helpers of Zerubbabel. The antitypical Zerubbabel is God's true prophet, Brother Houteff. So although he's dead in the grave, his helpers, those striving to be one of the 144,000, are the ones that represent his work, the original shepherd's rod. They're also identified as Elijah's helpers. We'll read this in General Conference Special, page 34. It says, since God is not experimenting, and since he means just what he says, there should be no doubt in your minds that the scriptures concerning antitypical Elijah, he who is to awaken the church and to warn the Laodiceans of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, make sure that he is one person. Of a surety, he is to have faithful helpers, but according to the prophet Nahum, he will greatly make use of the printing press and will scatter his message by the postage stamp everywhere as the leaves of autumn. Well, what clear evidence can we see that the antitypical Elijah is none other than Brother Houteff, the one person, not a slew of counterfeits like the rodent branch or anything of the sort? But this true Elijah, Brother Houteff, is to have faithful helpers, those of us who take the original shepherd's rod and make use of the printing press and scatter the message by the postage stamp everywhere as the leaves of autumn. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. We're to help and represent the prophet of God as Elijah's helpers. And this in Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, page 15, it says, the name of the prophet is also given to those called to instruct the people of God, though not directly inspired as a prophet in the highest sense. Education, see Education, page 46. So, although we as Elijah's helpers are not inspired in the highest sense like Ellen White or Victor Houteff, nonetheless, we're identified as prophets because we instruct the people in the message that the prophets gave us in the golden bowl. That's what the 7 or the tubes that take the oil out of the golden bowl to the candlestick. That's the ministers. That's our role. So that's who represents the prophet of God in this showdown at Mount Carmel. So who are the prophets of Baal? Well, the rod gives us a clue. Jezreel letter number 8, page 12, paragraph 3. This is the day in which all things are to be restored. And this is the day for each individual, independent of another, to decide whether or not these anti-rod teachers are the antitypical prophets of Baal. Now, at the time Brother Houteff wrote at that, he was referring primarily to the Laodicean ministers, the angel of Laodicea that was openly fighting the shepherd's rod. However, in the time of the scattering, when we have all of these teachers in the name of the rod teaching things that are against the original shepherd's rod, well, they also too are anti-rod teachers and by definition prophets of Baal, antitypical prophets of Baal, when they teach things that are not found in the original shepherd's rod. Florence Houteff, Ben Roden, M.J. Bingham, Donna Dare, and the list goes on. Also, look at this in Testimonies, Volume 5, page 212. No superiority of rank, dignity, or worldly wisdom, no position in sacred office will preserve men from sacrificing principle when left to their own deceitful hearts. Those who have been regarded as worthy and righteous prove to be ringleaders in apostasy and examples in indifference and in the abuse of God's mercies. Their wicked course he will not tolerate no longer, and in his wrath he deals with them without mercy. So, brethren, it's naive to not think that the ancient men who are before the house, who are first to feel the stroke of God's wrath, cannot include Davidian ministers or self-appointed ones and these leaders of these various man-controlled associations. They're the ringleaders of apostasy. To fail to recognize this is to be willfully blinded. So, when 100% rod-only Davidians reorganized to oppose the apostasy of Florence Houteff and the false teachings of the branch under Roden, they had a session in Arlington, California, and these were some of the representatives there. Now, looking at this picture, you just see people. But would you be able to identify the prophets of Baal versus the prophet of God in this picture? Well, I'll give you a hint. There are 3 prophets of Baal and 1 representative of the prophet of God. 1 hands of Zerubbabel, 1 Elijah helper. So you know who is who? Well, brethren, you cannot understand this until you know who the people are and how they manifest themselves as time went on through history. By your fruits you will know them. Well, we can identify clearly the prophets of Baal under the red arrows. This man, M.J. Bingham, started the counterfeit Bashan Hill. And we've exposed that in a video on YouTube. You can see that in the link in the description box below. The woman next to him became his second adulterous wife, Jimmy Bingham. So after MJ died, she took over as the porter to bind up the testimonies and continued on until she died. And now it's been handed over to the son Trevor, who was not even was he alive in this picture? No. So he wasn't even born yet. A third prophet of Baal, this young man, Donnie Wayne Adair, who pupiled or studied under Bingham for almost a decade, and then later moved over to Salem and usurped and took over and maintains control of the Salem Association to this day, teaching his winds of doctrine. So it brings the question, well, where was God's representative? Well, it was this gentleman under the green arrow, Brother H.D. Warden. He was the hero who preserved the integrity of the original shepherd's rod and maintained the leadership during the tumultuous period of the 1960s, the 1970s, on up into the Usurped Association. So there's the facts. Prophets of Baal outnumbering the prophet of God 3-1. And today it's probably even worse. Well, here's another rank impostor that has arisen in recent times. Look at this vain, presumptuous man to insert himself in front of the original building of Mount Carmel, where Brother Houteff published the original shepherd's rod and labored day and night to bring this message to us. And this man rises up with his lieutenants, pronouncing it. He's the one shepherd to lead the flock. Lord have mercy. This, of course, is Lennox Sam. He doesn't fool a lot of people in this country, the United States, but he's fooled a lot of people in Africa. People that think he's the antitypical King David. Failing to recognize that the true antitypical King David, his brother Houteff, will be resurrected in the kingdom of God to resume his work once again. The future gospel headquarters. Oh, Lord, how people are deceived by this man and his endless winds of doctrine and brainwashing presentations one after another. A man who is flagrantly lies and has stolen all of the artwork from upay7.org on the charts and put it on his website. Defiant and arrogant and presumptuous. Lord have mercy. So links for further study to expose these prophets of Baal from Bashan and Lennox Sam. Visit our website, yparish.org. We have a new video on YouTube, Bashan Hill Exposed. Please look at that. Or articles on the website, Carmel, Bashan, and Gilead. Which pasture? We need to know. Pre-purification. Is it in the rod? Well, this is one of the pillars of Lennox Sam teaching, the idea that there's more than one Ezekiel 9. It's complete heresy. Go to the rod and prove it. Find out what the day of reckoning is, according to looking up every rod reference on Matthew 25, verse 19. It's Ezekiel 9, not some pre-purification event. So Lennox Sam has been exposed. Or are they claiming to be the voice of the Lord today is Lennox Sam? It's utter nonsense. Can you recognize the Lord's voice today? You better listen to the original shepherd's rod and not to the voice of a man. Or who is the one shepherd to lead the flock today? Well, it certainly is not Lennox Sam. So we go through this in more detail. If you're not familiar with this, then please visit these links and wrestle with the Lord and know what the rod teaches, because that's our only soul salvation, to get our doctrine, brother, sister, from the golden bowl and CC from these men whose breath is in their nostrils. So what makes UPA7.org different? Well, we strive to put into practice every word in the Holy Bible, the Spirit of Prophecy, and the Shepherd's Rod. And in so doing, we publish and teach only the original Shepherd's Rod literature and study charts. Everything else that's being published is altered, it's tampered, it's a counterfeit. The artwork has been changed, the text has been retypeset, words are left out, everything's been perverted. The only reliable message is facsimile, photographic reproductions of the original, and that we publish from cover to cover. We believe in establishing storehouses worldwide to fulfill the siege of Ezekiel 4, as specified in 7 Testimonies, page 140. In large part through our publishing houses will be the work of that other angel that comes down from heaven and joins the 3 angels' message to give it power and force, according to Early Writings, page 277. We can't neglect this. It's right there. That's the work given to the shepherd's rod, to the hands of Zerubbabel, for us to carry out today. We believe that the next gospel headquarters will be in Palestine, found in 2 Answer Book, page 48. That all these headquarters today are nothing but man-appointed controlling associations that try to rule the world through their headquarters in the United States. It's utter nonsense. There should be storehouses, publishing work worldwide. UPA7.org believes that the last true porter prophet, Victor Houteff, was smitten in 1955, and that the candidates for the 144,000 have to scatter worldwide to hasten the establishment of the kingdom of God and become the future leaders of the loud cry. You can look up 2SR, page 265. We're to be leaders, not followers of corrupted associations. We do not compel people to lean on the arm of flesh and follow man-elected and controlled associations and executive councils. No, not at all. We call in men and women to step out in faith and to claim the promises of God, and to head out even on their own to take this message as the leaves of autumn throughout Laodicea. There's nothing stopping you. We train our members to be leaders, not followers. If you'd like to know more, please get a hold of us. We do not form a confederacy with the state to form an IRS 501c3 organization for financial benefits of our donors. This is forfeiting the headship of Christ and taking the leadership of Caesar over our heads. It's nonsense. Total apostasy. So what are you going to do, brother, sister? We're confronted with this reality. Well, let's move forward. Let's get this message out as specified in the original Shepherd's Rod and break free from these controlling powers and these men that try to lord over God's heritage, and do what the Rod tells us to do. So in order to plead with Mother, there needs to be many storehouses established. How else are we going to reach 20+ million 70 Adventists worldwide? Think about this, brethren. If there were 1,000 storehouses today, they would have to publish 20,000 pieces of literature, say a month, just to get one piece of literature in the hand of each 70 Adventist. Or if there's only 100 storehouses, it would be 200,000 pieces of literature a month. If 144,000 people reached the church, that would be about 140 pieces of literature per person. But we know that today, visibly, that there may be at best 1,000 people that identify as Davidians. But of that, we know by the Pareto distribution and economic output that about 10% of the people actually do about 90% of the work. So that means 100 storehouses at best, would have to be publishing 200,000 pieces of literature on a regular basis to even reach every Seventh-day Adventist. Now, by way of comparison, look what Brother Houteff did. In the peak of Mount Carmel Center, 1954, there was a letter written. Brother Houteff indicated that there were almost about 50,000 pieces of literature leaving Mount Carmel every month. And at that time, the membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1955 was about 1 million. If we were to reproduce that today, that output, that means that Davidians would have to be publishing on the order of 1 million tracts a month. How are we going to do that? Davidia combined probably hasn't published 1 million pieces in a decade. How are we going to do it in a month to reach Mother? Well, the only way is to decentralize and break up the work into the hands of many. So the multiple storehouse concept is valid. Unfortunately, the man-controlled associations don't acknowledge it. They've been approached with this. They reject it. They oppose it. When we were in the Philippines, Mountaindale rejected it. We saw the need, immense, pressing need for publishing the literature in the Philippines. And they balked. They squelched it because they didn't have control over it. UPA7.org can send you a DVD which contains print files as PDF documents with the needed instructions to print in your area. All you need is a basic computer, a black and white laser printer, and a few simple tools. We even have a brother that's printing it out of an Office Depot to provide for people in his area. The great advantage of having a local storehouse is you don't have to wait months and weeks for literature to show up from the United States, and it's a very limited proportion. If you print your own, you could save the astronomical shipping cost. I mean, just to ship a handful of tracts to Canada cost 5 times more than it costs to print them. And to ship a box of literature to Africa cost hundreds of dollars. It's complete nonsense. But if the people were empowered to print locally, they could print on demand whatever they needed right then. They wouldn't have to wait. And all the money that's wasted on shipping could be used to buy ink and paper. Come on, think about this. So we should encourage people to print where they're located. If you need UPA7.org, we'd be happy to assist training you how to be a future leader during the period of loud cry, how to set up a storehouse and publish the original Shepherd's Rod. You don't need to ask permission. You don't have to wait on the arm of flesh or ask permission to do the work that God has plainly laid out for us in the original Shepherd's Rod message. So, brethren, pray about this. Think about it. Step forward in faith. Put your foot in the River Jordan and do the work that God would have in front of you. It's totally possible. We did it starting with nothing, no experience and no money. But God opened the door and miracles happened. And the same can happen for you. So please contact us. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to contact us anytime. We're upa7.org. Our email, upa5453@gmail.com. Our phone, 860-798-3672. Or better yet, visit our website, yparish.org. We have another website, upa7.org. Or shepherds-rod-speaks.org. All of them are set up to facilitate the spread of the Shepherd's Rod. And we can help you publish. So may God bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.